The People's Platform.
Man's capacity to justice makes democracy possible, but man's inclination towards injustice makes democracy necessary. Good evening and welcome. This is another edition of the People's Platform, and joining us this evening, of course, to continue a discussion on the current state of democracy here in Sri Lanka and the governance crisis that we are facing, in addition, of course, to the economic crisis that at least at the moment seems to be moving forward towards the better. To discuss these matters and much more, we've got with us Dr. Sakuntala Kadirgamar, the Executive Director of Law and Society Trust of Sri Lanka. A very good evening, Doctor, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me.
Doctor, we see discussions here in Sri Lanka centering a lot around the economic crisis. We get a lot of economists even coming on our shows and discussing how Sri Lanka should move forward. There are various opinions, but Sri Lanka as a society for the longest time have had issues in the economy, in democracy, and in many other aspects of society that have gone unaddressed. And we saw the final result of all of this, the epitome of the crisis that Sri Lanka faced back when the Aragalaya was at its peak. And today we are here trying to look for solutions, trying to look for a mechanism that suits Sri Lanka for a better tomorrow. Next year is an election year. The president has said it. Everybody's gearing up for elections. You see an increase in party conferences, party meetings that are being held across the country. But it's important that we understand where we are at today in terms of democracy, in terms of our governance structures. Because currently, although we are waiting for the people's mandate at next year's election, as far as the international community goes, as far as the IMF goes, Sri Lanka is still continuing as a country. So where do you think we are at today in terms of democracy, in terms of sovereignty of the people, in terms of fundamental rights of the people being protected as a nation today? Where are we at?
I think we are at a precarious position because we've had, a prolonged period of crisis. I mean, not only the COVID, the pandemic, which of course set all of us back, not only Sri Lanka, but it set our economy back. Then, of course, we had the economic crisis and many, I would say, harebrained policies of politicians that really brought us down to our knees. And the manifestation of the crisis was when we had 14 hours of power cuts, fuel crisis, all that. And then we had the change of government. But, I'm disappointed that after that groundswell of support and rejection by the people of not just the politicians, but the political system. I mean, they kept demanding for a system change, and we haven't had a system change. You just had old wine in old bottles, they just changed them around. So really that fundamental change has not taken place. And in fact, those who are now realigning their alliances and are back in parliament and in government are doing much to really negate the gains of the Aragalaya. I think the political parties, the politicians, and even society at large should really look back and say, how did this happen? How did we come to this state? So I think that learning opportunity seems to be lost. I hope not forever, but maybe temporarily. But we've had so many political crises, even leading to the Yahapalana government in 2015. The people are still demanding for democracy. So even in 2015, when they rejected an established politician, a man who presented himself to the people as, I'm the one who won the war. But nevertheless, he was clearly moving towards a very autocratic position. People rejected him. I mean, the parties that actually won that election, a coalition cobbled together, didn't have resources. They just relied on that groundswell of support from the people. So people want democracy, but there's a disconnect between what the political establishment provides for them and what they want. So I'm not sure how this election will go, but I think people themselves will have to think more. Are we still going to, vote the same parties into power, or maybe give them a smaller or bigger mandate? Is this what we want? Or are new people going to come in to politics as well and challenge the system? And I think that is where really our salvation lies in that, because I can't see the present establishment coming up with the ideas that are needed or having the vision, either economic or political vision or social vision, to really lead us out of this situation.
Speaking of new faces or young politicians or people who are not in the current establishment coming into power, one of the arguments that's being propounded, of course, by those in the establishment, by those from the major political parties, is the fact that these new people, they have no experience in governing. We have been governing Sri Lanka for generations, for decades. So we know what should be done, what can be done, and how to get it done. They have absolutely no experience. We have experience. This is not a time to experiment with the country. So give us the mandate, and we will steer you to safety.
Where has that experience taken us? I mean, their experience is written large on the balance sheets of this country, in the laws of this country, the chaos that has been brought through them. Is this a record that anyone could be proud of? If I were there, I would have hung my head in shame and sort of hidden the fact that they were responsible for this. A few political families have really governed Sri Lanka from independence. So when we look at our 75 years journey, which has been really a regression, and there's really very little to be proud of. We did have the few things that we could have been proud of, I think, were our social and economic indicators. Our investment in health, in education, that social safety net really provided mobility for poorer people to come up. And that was a great achievement. But today, in the context of our liberal economic models, these are seen as expensive things that the country can't afford. So we're cutting back on the education and health that was offered, that was provided as a public good. We're cutting that back to save costs. But as a result of it, really we are denuding our own human resources. So it's a very short-term policy. Now I know we are broke and we have to find the resources to be able to pay for these, but we have to prioritize what are the things we really need. And I think health and education are priorities. Maybe we have to even out our tax bases. I think people are groaning that value-added tax has been raised, with the poor pay as much as the rich, but there could have been a more sensible taxation scheme. Today, even people who are government servants or who are in the corporate sector but earning a low salary, I mean, they're from 100,000 really doesn't get you that far in life. So when you land the taxation on them and perhaps not on the companies who make much more, this is a problem. So, you have a very unstable situation, because if you look at the new reports, I mean, over 65% of the population is finding it hard to manage, to make basic needs met. Inequality is widening in our society. So these don't really make for a stable society. So I think these are the things that the government and future governments in waiting should be looking at and thinking about how we can address this. They are focusing on the balance sheet, but you have to also look at the people.
So getting back to this whole argument of experience, I think they're kind of contradicting themselves, because when these same individuals who supported a person who was out of the entire political establishment, former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa coming into power, their argument was, we are bringing a person who is not in the political establishment, fresh face. That's who we are bringing, a person who has a clean record. And there was no discussion about experience there. But now, when the people are maybe more open towards new faces being seen in the political establishment, in positions of power, they come forward and say, look, we tried with Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who was out of the system, and look where that got us. So don't vote for people without experience, because that is what will happen to Sri Lanka in the future again.
Well, I think we should perhaps clarify, and the voters should also be more demanding of information about the people whom they vote for. I mean, Gotabaya Rajapaksa was put forward as a non-political actor, but I mean, he was steeped in a political family, a dynasty almost. And so I think, he didn't act on his own for everything. And maybe he would have, I don't know who takes credit for his banning of fertilizer. I think everybody would distance themselves from it. But, he had an attribute to him that he didn't believe in consulting because they feel they know it all. So I think the candidate is not just simply one who is inexperienced in politics, but they have to have certain educational traits, they have qualifications, they need to have a democratic orientation because you can't run a democracy without actually consulting people and getting consensus. Ultimately, you take responsibility for your decisions, but it is a team effort, and I think you need to get the kind of people who can do that. Consultation is not a sign of weakness. Changing your mind or going back because of better counsel is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of more maturity. But we have lost respect for those kinds of personalities because we've been so used to a command control kind of authoritarian politics, but we call it democracy.
Well, there's much more to discuss, of course, about the situation in the country, where we are headed towards next year. It's almost the end of 2023, just a few more days, and we will be facing 2024. What challenges await Sri Lanka's democracy, Sri Lanka's social fabric in the year 2024? Stay tuned. We'll bring you the details right after this short commercial break.
The People's Platform.
I've had this idea for a few years now to go on a quest to try and discover who he was.
Why did you have to go for something like this?
I want them to see this film and say, oh my God, this country is beautiful.
Was there a motive behind this whole documentary to promote tourism?
It was an unintended consequence, I'd say, Maria. And so when I started this film, I had an idea of a story. But when I ended it, I had a whole different understanding of who he was.
20 years later, we are still finding every opportunity to honor the genius of the place.
News First exclusive with writer and director of The Genius of the Place of the Laziz. 5th of January 2024 from 9:30 p.m. onwards on TV1. Streaming live on News First YouTube and Facebook channels.
TV1, Sri Lanka's premier infotainment channel. In support of Sri Lanka's unique tradition of art and design, presents The Genius of the Place, the story of Jeffrey Baba, a film by Abdel Aziz. Exclusively aired in Sri Lanka on TV1, January 7th, 2024 at 7:30 p.m.
ස්වාමීනි අපරාධකාරියක් වෙන චෝදනාව ඇයට ලැබී තිබුණා සැබවින්ම ඇය අපරාධකාරියක් නොවේ ස්වාමීනි
ස්වාමීනි පොලිසිය විසින් සාක්ෂිකරුවන් කැඳවා සියලු සාක්ෂි විමර්ශනය කොට ගරු අධිකරණයට දන්වා තිබෙනවා
නීල පබලු අද රාත්‍රී 9ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්. TV1 TV for life.
Ajit Premadasa is the presidential candidate from the Samagi Jana Samdanya, says Dilan Pereira. SLFP Senior Vice President Shan Vijayalal joins SJB. Trade Minister prioritizes economic stability before the polls. Celebrations across the world to welcome 2024. We step into 2024 facing both challenges and the prospect of revitalizing the nation, says President in New Year's message. Fuel prices increased with effect from today.
TV1. TV for life. The People's Platform.
Welcome back. You're watching The People's Platform. We're in discussion with Dr. Sakuntala Kadirgamar. Doctor, we were speaking about the democratic framework in Sri Lanka. Now, moving forward into the year 2024, Sri Lankans have always had a huge insecurity when it comes to law enforcement, law and order. We have this massive drug bust taking place currently titled the Yuktiya operation. Now, there are mixed views. The minister and the IGP claims that this is purely to rid Sri Lankan society of the drug menace. We saw a similar operation being conducted just a few months ago where even school students were stopped before their schools and bags were searched. The results of those, of course, are yet to be seen. But this operation continues and many arrests have been made. All of this is really taking place in a backdrop where there have been massive aspersions cast on the Inspector General of Police. I mean, I'll take it a step further. Instead of aspersions, there is a decision from the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka saying that the current acting Inspector General of Police had violated the fundamental rights of a suspect who was arrested during the time, of course, when he was holding a lesser position maybe a few years back. And the crime or the judgment says that he was part of a group that tortured this suspect. So against such a backdrop, what really do you think the trust of the general public in law enforcement, what has this really done? Is there a way, however, to bridge this gap? Because faith, trust and that social contract is an important aspect in preserving the social fabric in Sri Lanka.
For years, the police have been under criticism for using, torture and brutal tactics. And of course, during the war years, no one dared criticize either the police or the armed forces. So, because people felt that they were fighting a national security problem. And I think as a result of it, there's been a far too widespread acceptance of torture and brutal practices till such time as it actually affects your own family. When it's happening to somebody else, you can say, oh, what's to be done? It's a national security problem. But when it affects you personally, that's when people start getting conscious about their human rights. I think that attitude has to change. And that attitude can change, it takes a long process. I mean, from education, with civic groups, standing up for the rights of people. And with, the police themselves being held accountable. But obviously, who is holding them accountable? If the president appoints such people, in spite of the fact that there is a court judgment against them, the president is simply indicating that he doesn't care what the Supreme Court has to say. He is the final determinant, and therefore you have to accept the IGP that I give you.
But is that really a correct position?
It is not a correct position.
The president alone doesn't appoint the Inspector General of Police. It has to get the endorsement, of course, of the Constitutional Council.
That's true. I should have clarified that. And even the Constitutional Council also has, I think, lost its way on this. I mean, they were created as an institution to be able to find the appropriate candidates and to get bipartisan support for these candidates, so that there is a process by which the opposition, the parliamentary groups, and in the old days civil society also was part of this process, so that you had widespread respect and acceptance of the person. But if you're given a short list bad fruit, and then you choose the best of the bad fruit, or what you think is the most effective of the bad fruit. That doesn't serve anyone's interest. So there must be criteria as well when the Constitutional Council is choosing these people. And sure, there is a seniority listing, etc., when it comes to appointments, but something like the court judgment should really, be a wake-up call that such a person cannot be appointed to this position.
So moving forward, is there really a way? It doesn't really seem like the president is going to change his decision and maybe appoint a new person, or the Constitutional Council is going to withdraw their approval on this. Is there any way to bridge this gap that is currently present in the wake of the appointment of the acting IGP?
Well, then people will now pray for an election outcome that might change this. That's one way of doing it. But that also is not a great way, because if each succeeding replacement government starts changing the personnel around, then that further politicizes the appointments to these processes. And that is what happened in the past, that we found that, the bureaucrats, the civil servants, the police, they were new recruitments were being taking place when a new government came in, or promotions went on different tracks, and this is a bad practice. And the promise that was made during the Yahapalana the government was that they would change these practices, and they promised through a constitutional reform process that they would abolish the executive presidency, that they would do more to deepen and strengthen democracy, and that was the promise. But again, it got caught up in politics, and it got caught up in ethno-nationalist politics, and we missed an opportunity. And really the country has suffered as a result of it. So people have to really rethink their whole approach to, I think the constitution, the executive presidency, the political culture that is taking place in this country. And I think the Aragalaya, again, was a wake-up call, but we didn't build on that movement. We didn't build on that process. We've done as much as we can to suppress it and delegitimize it. I mean, today you have people linking the Aragalaya with drug use. I mean, this is absurd, but of course they have a platform and they say it, repeat it 10 times, and maybe people will believe it or not. But still, that is not the whole purpose of the Aragalaya. It was something, a struggle, a people's mass movement, which political actors should have really taken note of.
So, Dr. Kadirgamar, one final question before we go. You've seen governments come and go. You've worked with the people. You've fought for their fundamental rights. You've worked to secure and establish democracy here in Sri Lanka. What do you feel about the next election when it comes to the general public exercising their vote? Do you think that they would be more mindful in who they elect into power, or would the same gimmicks of the past, like, handouts close to the election, reduction in fuel prices, and maybe a resurgence of ethno-religious issues that usually crop up very close to an election, would those have a negative impact on the general public, and would they go back to their old bad voting practices instead of using their minds and voting or using their vote in an informed manner?
It's really hard to say. I mean, elections are unpredictable. But I talk to a lot of people. I mean, to me, taxi drivers, tuk-tuk drivers, pick-me drivers are very much a barometer of how people think. And you find people really questioning the established political parties. You often hear them saying, we want to try someone new. But then there's also a counter, the reaction to this, because they feel that none of the political parties come without baggage, small or big. So I think it's a lot depends on whether in the last stages or in the stages up to the elections that the political parties bring in new people who have some track record of having achieved something in life besides being the son or daughter of an existing politician. So whether it's a track record in business or in the civic activities or in some other capacity, even as a community organizer, they might bring an experience that will be respected. And I think people are looking for that as well. So I mean, I would wish I could predict this. I would have even bought a lottery ticket if I had that capacity, but I think it's hard to say. But I think all the major political parties that have taken voters for granted will get a shock. They haven't got a vote base that they can 100% count on. So it might be really a hung parliament. I think that is very likely, that it'll be a divided parliament. And, you know, that is more difficult to manage, but maybe that is better because people will learn to, you know, negotiate. And now that, you know, there's a court judgment that you can't cross over without losing your seat, that might make people think a little bit more about, you know, selling their souls for office in another party. So maybe this is a time for some compromise and negotiation. We might find that via media.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sakuntala Kadirgamar, Executive Director of Law and Society Trust of Sri Lanka, for joining us on the People's Platform and, of course, educating the general public on these very important matters concerning the democracy here in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much to all our viewers out there for tuning in to another episode of the People's Platform. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.
Thank you.